Summer break is what most kids look forward to the most. It's the epitome of youth. No homework for months, hanging out with friends and family, or just staying holed up in your room until the next school term. Most kids are having the time of their lives despite the scorching heat, until they're reminded that their break is ending and school is coming. Kids cherish the last bit of their break before the new semester, but not 12-year-old Daniel Kenneth Woods Jr. Daniel, also referred to as Danny or Jr., was from Gray, Maine. He had 3 siblings and lived with his mother and father. He was your average energetic kid who also helped his father around the house. While enjoying his life just being a kid, he seemed quite responsible for his age. Unlike most kids who wanted summer break to last forever, he was looking forward to the end of it. His father had promised him he could earn some cash picking beans at a local farm, and the prospect of earning money, even just a little, was enough to make any kid excited. Being a kid in 1954, there was no internet or phones to entertain children, so he did what most kids did at the time. He left his house to hang out with his friends. He enjoyed basketball, baseball, and fishing, and was considered tall for a 7th grader, weighing 100 pounds. He would stroll around town with his recognizable, thick-framed glasses and goofy smile. His brother Richard, who was 3 years old in 1954, recalled a time when Daniel was helping their father out at their sawmill. In between work, he would make funny faces to make Richard laugh. His older sister, Carol, who was 14 at the time, gave us a good idea of how innocent her brother was. He once wrote her a note asking if she knew where his favorite keychain was. Not thinking much of it, she simply put away the note and went over to a friend's place, not realizing that that would be the last time she saw her brother. On July 12, 1954, Daniel made plans to go fishing with a friend who lived nearby. His mother and younger siblings were home at the time as he was getting ready to head out for the day, bringing along his new fishing rod he was excited to try. Occupied with his younger siblings, his mother heard the front door slamming shut. That would be the last time he was seen in person. Shortly after, his mother received a phone call from Daniel. He was calling from a corner store about 3.5 miles away. She thought it was odd that he had already made such a distance since he hadn't been gone for long. Regardless, she listened to what he had to say. He told her that a traveling salesman had offered him a job knocking on doors and selling items for 50 cents per hour. He promised that he would be home before dinner and hung up. The sun had set and hours had gone by, but he had not returned home. His parents quickly filed a missing persons report, and the police took the case seriously. They went to the corner store he had called from, which was owned by a woman named Edra Wilkinson. She confirmed that he had been in her store but couldn't provide further information. While this was unfolding, Daniel's father made a shocking revelation. According to the timeline, he had been only 200 feet away from his son when Daniel was at the store. Around this time, his father was at a filling station getting his tires changed. There was a chance that Daniel had recognized his father but chose not to say anything because, as he said, he might have thought I wouldn't let him go. With hindsight, his father would have most definitely not let him out of his sight. There wasn't much for the police to go off on, so they reached out to the public, hoping someone might have information. By July 27, 1954, numerous sightings of Daniel were reported. One witness stated they saw him in Worcester, but this was ruled out as a mistaken identity. 3 other witnesses from Lewiston, Maine, claimed a young boy who resembled Daniel had knocked on their doors selling needles. A man from Portland was questioned, but that led nowhere. There was one witness account that did stand out. Daniel's schoolmate, Donna Aberlay, had seen him the afternoon he went missing. According to her, he was in a maroon sedan near Dry Mills School, waving hello to her. In the vehicle was a man in the driver's seat, a woman, and 2 children, none of whom she recognized. The man appeared to be looking at a map, which was why they had stopped. After their brief exchange, he folded up the map and drove toward Little Sebago Lake on Poland Spring Road. Donna also noticed that the license plate was yellow, which was uncommon in the area. This was an intense moment for the family. Carol had learned about his disappearance while at her friend's home. She remembers how frantic everybody was in finding her brother. She even had to wear gloves when getting mail from their mailbox, as instructed by the police, in case the abductor left a ransom note with fingerprints. While the investigation team chased leads, a separate team searched the Woods' residence. On the 28th, the Maine Fish and Game Department participated in the search around the house. The State Forestry Department also helped scour through the heavier sections of the woods. As a result, they found a blood-stained towel in the woods, and Daniel's mother submitted her dress for possibly containing blood. They sent these items to the chief pathologist in Portland, Maine, but there was no public statement on whether the tests led anywhere. They also went to the pond where Daniel was originally supposed to go fishing. They drained it and searched, but found nothing. It seemed as though they were doing everything in their power to find him, but every path led to a dead end. That same evening, Daniel's mother anxiously waited for any news from the authorities. Then, their phone rang, and without hesitation, she picked it up. There was an operator who informed her that somebody from Manhattan was on the line and asked if she wished to accept the charges. She hesitantly agreed, hoping this call could lead to finding her son. On the other end was a woman who sounded agitated and had a thick, unrecognizable accent. She said her name was either Goodson or Gidson. Unfortunately, her accent was so thick that Daniel's mother couldn't be sure. The woman claimed that Daniel was with a man she knew. This man, supposedly from Birmingham, Alabama, ran a farm where he boarded children, presumably to help with physical labor. She said he drove a Ford Studebaker sedan, which could have been the same model Donna had seen him in. She instilled fear in Daniel's mother by saying that the man was mean and known for mistreating the children. Fearing for the worst, Daniel's mother notified the police about the call. However, after investigating, they could not locate the man or the farm, suggesting that the call was likely a hoax. As infuriating as this was, such hoaxes were common in high-profile cases. While reaching out to the public could help investigations, they can also create opportunities for cruel people to prank grieving families. For several days, the Woods family waited in anticipation, hoping Daniel was still alive. 3 days later, 2 fishermen from Freeport, Maine, were rowing along the banks of the Androscoggin River when they found the unclad body of a young boy in the high waters. They immediately reported this to the police, and the boy was pulled out shortly after 2:30 p.m. There was a shoestring tied around his left wrist, indicating he was bound before his death. He had been viciously beaten with about 7 blows to the head, some as deep as 1 to 4 inches. This was determined to be the cause of death. One blow was so severe that it had nearly forced one eye out of its socket. Further autopsy revealed that his lungs did not contain water, meaning he died before being discarded in the river. Judging by the condition of his body, he had been in the water for 3 to 5 days, but they could not determine the exact time or date of his death. They concluded the river was not the crime scene because there was no blood or signs of a struggle. Authorities believe that the body was most likely Daniel Woods Jr., given that he was the most recent boy who went missing a few days before. To confirm, the investigation team brought his father to the morgue, where he verified that the body found in the river was indeed his son. Because his body was found nude, the police thought the murder was sexually motivated. However, this could not be confirmed, and they most likely came to this conclusion due to the case casting nationwide attention. The police returned to the scene to search for additional evidence. extending their search miles away from where Daniel was originally found. Unfortunately, they only recovered his Argyle socks, the same ones he wore the day he went missing. They scoured through the same area they originally went through when he was still considered missing. This time, they found his glasses and belt inside a tree, as well as his clothes buried underneath rocks. There was speculation that his murderer returned to the scene to place his belongings in those spots, and that they may be familiar with the forest. While the weapon was never officially located, a farmer did find a broken handle from a sledgehammer in a field 150 feet away from the riverbank. It might have been used on Daniel, but unfortunately, it had rained between the preliminary search and the discovery of the handle. This could have washed away any hair or DNA that the police could have extracted for testing. On August 2nd, the Woods family conducted a funeral at their residence, attended by friends and family. They planned to hold the service at their house before driving to the burial. However, before they had the chance to do that, Attorney General Alexander Liffler knocked on their door. Unbeknownst to the family, he had requested a second autopsy on Daniel's body. As a result, his parents had to suddenly end the service and announce to everyone that it had to be cut short. Daniel's body was then sent to a pathologist and instructor at Harvard Medical School. There was never a clear answer as to why the Attorney General requested a second autopsy. The result did confirm that he wasn't sexually assaulted. Beyond that, it's unknown what else they could have learned from a second examination. By then, the authorities had questioned about 900 people, some as far away as California, and offered a $1,000 reward, which is equivalent to $11,692 USD in today's currency. Unfortunately, none of the questioning led to the identification of his killer or killers. Eventually, Daniel's case grew cold and remains unsolved to this day. There has been an array of suspects, but the authorities never had strong evidence to connect any of them to the case. I'll go through the list of notable suspects that stood out to me at least. The first person I'll be talking about technically wasn't considered an official suspect, but his behavior was odd to say the least. The evening before the funeral in Westport, Maine, police stopped a car for a driving infraction. In the driver's seat was a 28-year-old man named Philip W. Wheeler. Not much is known about his past, other than that he was from Lynn, Massachusetts. In the car, the police noticed 4 additional boys. As far as I know, the boys were unrelated to each other. Philip had picked them up from Portland, and when he was asked why he had them in his car, he simply answered, "I just like to have boys ride around with me." If that's not suspicious, then I don't know what is. Taking note of how strange that sounded, the police took him in for further questioning. Although I couldn't find details on what happened during the interrogation, I did find that Alexander Liffler was involved. This might explain why he requested a second autopsy on Daniel the following day. Westport is about 45 miles away from Gray, a little over an hour's drive, so it wouldn't be too far-fetched to assume that he was involved in Daniel's case. If we go by Donna's witness account, she saw other people in the car. Perhaps Philip picked up the woman and 2 other children before picking up Daniel. If we consider Philip's supposed preference for having boys in his car, the woman may have been a one-off occurrence, or she might have been a male with long hair, and Donna mistook him for a female. Philip was never charged, and he was never connected to Daniel's case. While the circumstances align, there is no solid proof that he was Daniel's perpetrator. Another suspect of interest is Herman Barmore, also known as Charles Fisher. For simplicity, I'll refer to him as Charles, as the newspapers did as well. Not much is known about his background, but he was in prison for the murder of 12-year-old Peter Gorham in 1955. Peter was on a Boy Scout camping trip, and it was initially believed that he had ran away to return to his old home in Texas. but in August of the same year, his remains were found 5 miles south of the camp. The police questioned about 500 people, and Charles was one of them. He stood out to them since he already had a warrant for sodomy on an unnamed juvenile back in May. They conducted a polygraph test, and his results were inconclusive. Although polygraph tests should never be used as evidence due to their unreliability, they can still provide the police with an idea of how to proceed with interrogations. Charles admitted to killing Peter, but he claimed it was a target practice accident. The police didn't believe him and thought he had shot the boy in the head with a rifle to cover up a sex crime. In the end, Charles was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. Some web sleuths believe that he may have been Daniel's killer. Unfortunately, he was never connected to his case either, and he had passed away before he could be questioned. This theory also doesn't have a strong basis to link it back to Daniel either. His method of killing was different, as he shot Peter, whereas Daniel died as a result of blunt force trauma. Additionally, there are no reports of him ever being near Gray. While these two suspects were never officially linked back to Daniel, there was another suspect of interest. The police looked into a traveling music salesman in Sioux City, Iowa. The police chief had seen news of a man in Iowa who abducted and murdered 8-year-old Jimmy Bremer. Both cases closely resembled each other, so the police chief contacted Sioux City authorities to question the man. As far as we know, nothing came from the questioning. The investigators were stumped. Each lead they followed resulted in a dead end. They returned to the newspapers in hopes of expanding their parameters and stumbling across new leads. That's when they found a column right below Daniel's article. Raymond Trudeau was a 6-year-old boy who had just celebrated his birthday the day he went missing. On July 2nd, 1954, he walked alone to his father's workplace to ask him for a nickel to buy ice cream since it was hot that day. After their exchange, he was on his way home. That was when 43-year-old drunk Lucian Picard spotted the lone boy on the streets. Lucian was described as a 4'11" man with a Charlie Chaplin mustache and a torso longer than his legs. He was unemployed at the time and lived in a rooming house in downtown Montreal. What was very alarming about him was that he was always watching children play in the evening. After realizing his son never returned home, Raymond's father reported him missing. The police immediately went into action, and they received witness accounts of a strange man talking to the young boy around 6 p.m. the day he disappeared. Some of Raymond's friends had also seen him with a man they described as having a funny face. It wasn't until 3 days later that there was an update. A handyman, though in some articles it said it was a truck driver, found 2 bloody cardboard boxes surrounded by decaying vegetables and fruits near a waterfront. He approached the boxes because he saw a small human foot sticking out from one of them. To his absolute horror, he found dismembered human remains wrapped in newspapers. He immediately reported this to the authorities. Since Raymond was the only boy reported as missing, the police showed his father the red and blue striped sweater found with the remains. He confirmed that his son had worn the same sweater the day he went missing. The following day, they requested that his father identify the body. To his devastation, he confirmed that it was indeed his son. Meanwhile, one of the tenants living in the same rooming house as Lucian smelled a foul odor coming from Lucian's room. As it turns out, Lucian was hiding the rest of Raymond's remains in a suitcase. The police were called, and they found a newspaper clipping with a hole that perfectly matched the one wrapped around the remains in the boxes. By this point, Lucian had already fled, and the police launched one of the biggest manhunts in the city's history. On August 2nd, Lucian was found and arrested in Quebec City. He initially told authorities that he had just happened to stumble upon the remains in his bedroom and had no idea where they came from. Afraid that he would be blamed, he fled. Obviously, the police could smell the deceit, so he changed his story, claiming he had led the boy to his bedroom. But when the boy wouldn't stop crying, he strangled him to death. Afterward, he went to a nearby tavern to get drunk. Similar to his first story, he claimed that when he returned to his room, Raymond's body was already dismembered. He was too drunk to remember how that happened. Once again, his story changed when he went to court for the murder. He denied all accusations, claimed he never met the boy, and insisted he would never harm a child. Despite shifting his stories, he was ultimately found guilty and sentenced to death by hanging in Bordeaux prison in Montreal. On February 11, 1955, he was executed. Netizens theorized that Lucian might be connected to Daniel's case for reasons such as Quebec being close to Maine, less than a 5-hour drive away. Additionally, Quebec license plates were yellow at the time. However, there was no further investigation into this theory, and it is, at most, a weak link. Again, I know I'm putting a lot of weight on this witness account, but Donna, who is Daniel's classmate and would recognize him from a mile away, did say that she saw Daniel with a group, and from what I could find, Lucian at most had a roommate who coincidentally was charged with gross indecency involving minors. Lucian was alone for the most part. It would be costly to drive down, find a hotel to stay in, then drive back up for someone who is unemployed. Therefore, he would have no reason to cross the border at the time. Despite all of these early leads, Daniel's case ultimately went cold. Forensics was not as advanced as it is today, and with the rain washing away any potential DNA evidence, his case was filed away in a metal cabinet, joining the other unsolved cold cases. The case was reopened in 1992 when Warren Cole, a restaurateur from Gray, admitted to assaulting boys in the past. Unfortunately, there was no conclusive evidence linking Warren to Daniel's murder. The case remained silent for a couple of years until 2003, when suddenly, Gray residents and Maine lawmakers received letters from a man named Ronald Ridge. The letters were mostly criticisms of the Maine police written in rhymes. The Woods family received a particularly different letter. This supposed Ronald claimed that as a child he was molested near their residence along Route 100 and believed that he is the same man responsible for killing Daniel. The note, however, did not mention a name. The police once again reopened the case and attempted to trace the letters, but they could not determine who Ronald Ridge was or if he was still alive. Richard, Daniel's little brother, still lived in Gray, and his daughter, Alicia, who was 23 at the time, wrote back to him, but he never responded. 70 years have passed since then, and Gray is still haunted by the murder. Daniel Woods has become somewhat of a small-town urban legend. Parents sometimes bring their kids to his grave to preach about stranger danger, though I'm not too sure how I feel about that. His case was the first ever to be discussed at a public roundtable broadcast on TV. For those unaware, a roundtable broadcast is similar to an open discussion where board members and other parties can talk about any topic. Alton Savage, an Auburn police chief, stated at the table that the Michigan killer was most likely the suspect, which is a stretch in my opinion. The Michigan killer, also known as John Norman Collins, targeted women between 1967 and 1969. Additionally, he was born in 1947, making him 7 years old at the time of Daniel's death. So, unless he thinks a 7-year-old boy made it to Gray, Maine undetected and murdered Daniel, a 12-year-old tall, skinny yet physically active boy, then be my guest. It isn't impossible per se, but it certainly involves a lot of illogical jumps. Richard, who was 52 years old at the time of the 2003 interview, felt it was deeply unfair that his brother was brutally taken away from his life before they could create fond memories together. To this day, he gets choked up every time he thinks about it. At the end of it all, someone lost a son, a brother, and a friend. Carol stated that after their brother's death, they were forbidden to speak of it. It was as if he had become a ghost that haunted them, and it was painfully clear that it destroyed their parents. The guilt of knowing that you were a few feet away from your son and could have stopped him. The guilt of knowing that all it would have taken was to tell him not to accept a stranger's job offer is absolutely a lot to carry. Carol continued by saying, quote, "My parents aged so much. You could see the life drain out of their bodies. My father was the one who had to identify the body." She has since moved out of Maine and lives in Florida. Daniel's mother passed away 9 years after the murder, and their father passed away 7 years after the 2003 interview. Right now, it seems like the only way this case can be solved is if someone comes forward with new information. It is likely that anyone involved, including the perpetrator, has long since passed away. For now, this case remains unsolved until further evidence emerges. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to Daniel's story. If you or anyone you know has any information regarding this case, please reach out to the Major Crimes Unit South at 1-800-228-0857 or 207-657-3030.